there was a lot of fear and turmoil. I want to sort of address this issue now by asking Matt Prohaska to come on up and join me. We can get rid of these. And what I want to cover off here is this notion of, you know, what's happened since then. We've noticed, by the way, it feels like the world, everyone complains about walled gardens, and yet what it feels like with all these new entrants, we're just getting more walled gardens. So, and that doesn't feel like an open data system, and that doesn't feel like that's the way forward. In fact, what we've noticed is that there is this, what we're calling the consumer data conundrum. What is that? Well, it's this observed relationship between, on the y-axis, the quality and quantity of consumer data, and on the x-axis, the propensity to use said data for marketing purposes. And what we found is there is this inverse correlation where, you know, the banks and the credit agencies and the telcos up at the top are hesitant to utilize the wealth of consumer data sets that they have for marketing purposes. Why? Because it is their core business and they derive their revenues. When Verizon bought AOL, and I talked to Tim Armstrong and I told him, look, the enemy, your biggest enemy, carries a Verizon business card. I think the Verizon people are not going to let you in on that data. And sadly, that turned out to be largely true, which is why he's no longer there. Fast forward into this sort of GDPR world, which, remember, very few people, leading up to May 25th, we didn't know a lot with any certainty about GDPR. We knew the date, May 25th, and we knew the penalty, 4% of global revenues or 20 million euros, whichever is greater. That's basically the only knowns, right? What we didn't know was the consent mechanism. We didn't know people's propensity to provide said consent. We didn't know about terms like legitimate interest. These were all variables. And so whenever there is variables, people pull back. And that's why we saw a lack of deal activity. You know, the GDPR has this, you know, the 12 stars. It's not countries. I'm pretty sure it means it's representative of the 12 billion in deals of consumer data businesses that have transpired in the meantime, or maybe the 12 stars could represent the total number of consumer opt-outs since May 25th, out of 508 million. And you know, I made this joke and I thought it doesn't feel to me, because here's the challenge. Politicians, regulators, and privacy zealots will tell you that consumers are up in arms with this notion of their rough demo and proclivities being utilized to provide more targeted advertising. I don't buy it, especially, you know, when I talk to my kids, you know, younger people, that privacy, nobody cares. And so I said, I don't think anybody cares. Clearly, the business world doesn't care because 12 billion in deals. But that got me thinking, and it got me texting late at night with my good friend, Matt Prohaska.
Like any good start of a relationship, late night texting, always a good
Absolutely.
Get that started. Yeah,
absolutely.
That
was with a T, not an S.
Yes.
Okay. So
yeah, no, we got chatting, and you threw out a stat that you had very close to the last stat you showed. The total number of opt-outs. You had found from one source that there were how many people out of?
Yeah,
like 8 figures?
Like a handful.
One, yeah. So from a buy-side large agency platform had said that. So we wanted to test that, and hey, was that just one person? And I thought the original intent was us to find this one person.
Right.
And, you know, we would go find Nessie or something like that. Right. Like we're going to send our teams in Europe to go hunt them down. But we wanted to kind of broaden it out a little bit and get into, make sure we had enough of a sample size. The research dorks, the N equals at the bottom of the slide. You want to make sure that's more than one. And there's enough of a sample size there, and also to know, you know, a little bit of the why or the how behind it. So those texts were 3 weeks ago. So one of our core values is hustle. So we hustled together a quick little panel here and reached out with people in 3 countries to about 50 companies. We got 15 of them. Ironically, the opt-in from these companies holding this valuable data. Not everyone was able to share, but we did get quite a few thanks to Publicis UK this morning who came in, along with The Economist. But those 15, mostly publishers, a couple tech, a couple on the buy side, as you heard, reach a pretty decent chunk of folks across the pond and here, about 130 million. A good 7 out of 10 have a couple of the things related to the opt-in that we wanted to ask around some of the motivations and what they've been doing since preparing for May 25th and then since. 7 out of 10 have planned some negative press talking points to kind of prepare for this.
Did that occur to you to be high or low?
A little high.
A little high?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, 43%, about 3 out of 7 have actually received complaints themselves proactively, not kind of asking for it, but yeah.
Now, I'm going to go ahead and say that surprisingly is low to me. I would have thought like 100% would receive some form of complaint.
Yeah, I mean, there is the classic story of the very vocal minority, or those who feel very personally enraged by something that they'd want to take action and report something in, and maybe do that across not just one, but maybe hundreds of sites, and you can see a large population wanting to do that. Quick funny story. Does anybody know the history of how CCPA got started? Like the actual guy who created it? It was one person, a real estate exec here in California, told to me in Cannes by 2 very reliable sources. Tilde from AdExchanger, I think, is still here if you want to report this out. But this person was at a party in SoCal and heard from one of, let's say, a large platform who was at the party, a little, maybe on cocktail 6 or 7, told the story of, you wouldn't...
6 or 7 cocktails?
Cocktails, yes.
Okay, good.
You wouldn't believe what we have and what we could do with this. And this individual left the party and, forgive me, said, fuck that. And basically then got 600,000 petitions, put a good $5 million in, and wow. CCPA, in its current iteration, was born. So you can understand the personal impact, and someone who said, this is feeling like something's happening to me, I'm going to express that. It's not everybody. 3 out of 7 of these companies did receive actual complaints from at least one person. And then proactively, 4 out of 5 have put up an actual wall and either unplugged Europe. You've seen some major publishers who said, it's 5% of our business. The juice isn't worth the squeeze. I'm going to get out of that. We had one publisher client. We just spent the last 3.5 months actually plugging back in. They unplugged 140 tech vendors, and we put back 81 over 3.5 months after kind of going through the offensive process of doing it right. And so, you can see this balance between offense and defense, and people, wanting to prepare for the worst or not wanting to be certainly called out and the first one dinged by the EU regulators. But, for what it's worth, the big headline, and to verify your early sample, fewer than 2% have actually opted out. And that's, not because people have made it ridiculously hard to opt out, and you have to run a labyrinth, and you have to, triple verify your password, and we need to send a photo, and, it's not like it's a, Georgia state election or anything like that to be able to verify your ID. It was actually very easy to opt out. Yes.
So with under 2% consumers opting out, what's going on? They just announced these, transgressions lawsuit against 7 companies.
Yeah, a few
even
at the
some
top
of the CMPs that are actually trying to provide a consent mechanism here. What's that all about if it turns out that the facts are that consumers really don't give a shit?
A little bit of fear of the unknown, a little bit of, false equivalencies. I mean, you just had my old colleague from 13 years ago, Rob Leathern, up here talking. It's understandable when there are global headlines coming from a very large platform that has a lot of personal information about us. Holy cow, one ding there, and you can, and it wasn't obviously just one ding. You can see how that could then extrapolate, and oh my God, what is kind of happening to me? For what we heard from a CMP, one of the other acronyms maybe for your next bull there, one of the consent management platforms, they said that if they presented the data and actually gave in pretty clear English what the choice was, and hey, would you like to stay in and opt in, depending on how well it was worded by the publisher, between 70 and 90% of their audiences did stay. So, the message we think is obviously be transparent up front, treat your audiences like real human beings, like we all are. We know we're a little over-indexed in being educated, but everyone else kind of knows the score a little bit. I understand that I'm getting a little bit of personalization in exchange for a little bit of data. Just tell me what you're doing with it. Give me a chance if I want to bail out of the game. But then just be upfront and let me make sure I can still get the value prop.
So we obviously scrambled in the last 2 weeks to sort of try and get some amount of data to be able to talk about this topic. Would you do me a favor? Would you commit that let's follow this?
Yeah.
And let's get more data. Let's raise that N number so that we can get statistically significant. Because I'd like to talk about this, because I haven't heard this anywhere about the actual opt-out rates. Matt Prohaska, thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.